on mental health and using art for expression, self-transformation, empowerment, and community building. So we do a lot of community art projects, but we also have studio hours where we do various workshops. In the pandemic, we've been doing a lot online. So that's one of the reasons why you're finding us here. It's just been awesome the way we are supported by the library. So I'm super grateful to Jen and the relationship we've built with the library. We will have some programs in the summertime that will be outdoors, and maybe some very limited indoor programming. We share our studio space in Saratoga with Living Resources, which is another Capital District nonprofit that has a very strong art program for young adults and adults with developmental disabilities. And so we share our space with them. So that's why we do outreach in the community as well. So you are here tonight to learn a little bit about pastels. And pastels are, I'll be honest, pastels are actually relatively new to me within the last few years or so. So I've just used a lot of my time with pastels to sort of explore the qualities of the material. And if you're not familiar with the term expressive art, what that means is that it's really about the process of what we're making rather than the product. And so that really takes a lot of different forms for everyone. And I am going to show you how to make some final products with your pastels. But I encourage you to just spend a lot of time playing with them, seeing how they interact on the paper and with other materials. And you learn a lot that way by just playing. We do that a lot in my visual journaling class, where we try out different materials on the page just to explore a little bit how mixed media works. So I'm going to be sharing my screen tonight to just give you a little bit of overview about different pastels and different techniques. And while I'm doing that, I want to just go through a supply list that you're going to need. So if you got your kit, or if you have some at home, you're going to get your pastels out, both your soft pastels, those are what we call chalk pastels also, as well as a glass of water, a cup of water, a towel, and if you have a paintbrush, there's a paintbrush that came in the kit as well, if you have the kit. And I know there's a few other things, but those are the most important things off the top of my head. In my presentation, I give you a full list there. So let me go ahead and do this so you can kind of start gathering your materials a little bit. While we go into presentation mode. Loading, loading, loading. Okay. Okay, so the difference between soft pastels or chalk pastels and oil pastels. Soft pastels are typically square. They are sometimes made round, but they are usually sort of long and rectangular. They're very chalky, and they can be broken easily. So you do want to handle them with care, but sometimes you may want to intentionally break them. I actually have a few different sets of pastels so that I can do that sort of thing. I can take a larger pastel, break it into smaller pieces so it is a little easier to work with. And then I have another set that's longer pieces that are whole. So obviously that's an investment, but just to explain to you, you know, how to use them in different ways. Oil pastels are a little more like crayons, but they do consist of oil and they're much more durable. Both soft pastels and oil pastels blend. So they're very good for either creating new colors or creating something that looks a little bit like an impressionistic or a watercolor type picture. And a lot of people tend to shy away from them because they think they're messy, they get dusty, and lots of pieces fly all over the place. And if you don't like sensory stuff, it may be uncomfortable to use your hands to work with them. So I'm going to show you some different tools that might help you in terms of keeping your space clean and using various tools to do the blending so that you don't have to constantly be washing your hands. So let's go over those supplies again. You'll have your pastel kits, and I'll show you my setup, what it looks like on my workbench in a moment. In your kit, you were given mixed media paper, but you can also find various kinds of pastel paper. I tend to like using mixed media because you can then blend. I work a lot in mixed media, so you can blend other types of materials fairly easily. The downside is that sometimes it doesn't grab or absorb the pastel as much, so you might get a little more dusting with just a mixed media versus a pastel paper. I have two kinds of towels. I have a regular, it's like actually an old cut-up t-shirt kind of towel, and I have shop towels that are a little bit thicker, like a paper towel. Baby wipes for your fingers if you want, or even just water to dip your fingers in and wash them off. The paintbrush. You're also going to want to get either a toothpick or a popsicle stick. You can even use a chopstick or a knife, anything, a plastic knife. We're going to be doing a little bit of carving with them today, so you're going to want to grab that at some point. One other thing that is difficult for some people with using pastels is storing them. So there's a couple of different things you can do. You can either use a fixative, and I'll show you this up close in a minute, but this can be purchased at Michael's or any art supply store. It's just called a final fixative, or if you want, you can get a workable fixative. What that means is you can spray it. Let's say you've started a picture. You got to go cook dinner or pick up a child or take a nap, whatever you need to do. You can spray it with a workable fixative and then come back to it later, so that, things don't get brushed off of your work. Hairspray, like very simple, cheap dollar store hairspray, is a perfect substitute for fixing. The other thing you can use for storing is wax paper. Wax paper as a liner in between the pieces of paper in your journal, or wherever you want to store your pastels. So that comes in very handy. There's also other kinds of art papers that you can use, but again, I like to make stuff that's simple that people have around the house. So I suggest things that you might already have at home rather than having to go out and buy a bunch of new stuff. Okay, so any questions so far about our supplies? Okay.
We don't have any questions yet, Julie.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do now is, in a moment, I'm going to share my overhead camera. But what I would like you to do is get out a piece of the paper that you have. This piece of paper that you were given in your kit is a 6x8. If you're using your own paper at home, you can organize this however you want. We are going to be trying different techniques with our pastels. So I'm just going to ask you to make 9 boxes. I used a ruler and, tried to measure it out, but you do not have to do that. I'll show you another version that I did. And I'm actually going to be using this to demonstrate. So I just made my 9 boxes like this. Okay. The important thing is not so much about the boxes, but what you are going to label them with, because that'll help you to remember what the different techniques are that I'll teach you tonight. So go ahead and label. I'm going to leave this up for a moment while I organize my space and get ready to do our first soft pastel. So you can put your oil pastels off to the side for a moment and just get your chalk pastels out and your paper.
Julie, we did have one question. Is there a front or back to the paper? It's a good question because some of them had different textures, I know.
There is not. To the paper that you received in the kit, that is mixed media paper, and it is the same on both sides. So it does not matter which side of the paper you use. In general, that's not something you have to worry about unless you treat the paper or it's treated in some way. But usually paper that's treated will come with both sides treated. And with pastel paper, the way that it's treated is usually sanded. And I actually just sand my own, and I will show you what that looks like. Oops, we skipped ahead. There we go. I will show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my overhead cam in a moment here. Don't worry if you are not quite done with the list, because you will be able to see mine in the overhead. Very bright. Let me turn that down a little bit. I'm having a little bit of a hard time focusing, but hopefully we'll get it going on there. There we go. Okay, I want to show you a few other materials and supplies that you can use for especially your chalk soft pastels. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the light balance right here so things aren't glaring. A few other things that you can use here for blending is a chamois cloth. And you can find these again at Michael's or any art store. This can be used to wrap around your finger and rub for blending. Another tool for blending is a gum eraser. It is a flexible eraser, and the color will kind of rub off of it, and you can use that for blending. There are also blending tools that kind of look like pencils without any lead. They're paper, so it's like a very tightly rolled paper towel almost. And they come in different sizes so that if you want to do very fine point blending, you have really sharp points, and then, you know, larger as well. This is the sanding tool for paper. I'm not going to show you how to do sanding tonight, but just so you know that this is something you can use. And again, sanding helps to sort of rough up the paper, and the pastels will absorb a little bit better in there. I am going to show you, although you have white paper, I'm going to show you the activity that we're going to do with this on black paper, because as I was working today under my camera, I noticed that there's just a lot of glare with the white paper. And so it's partly intentional so that you don't see all the glare. The other part is that pastels look wicked cool against black paper. So I want to show you what I found at Target today in the dollar section, a black doodle pad. And it was $3, and literally just found it today over in the kids art stuff right when you walk in the door at Target. And it's really fun to do pastels on black paper. They just really stand out. They're very vibrant and a lot of fun. So you can pick those up. It's really pretty thin paper. It's more like crafting paper, but it would be perfectly suitable for this kind of activity. The other thing is I always have an extra piece of paper underneath my workspace, and that's because I tend to knock the dust off in various ways or blow it off. And if I have another piece of paper or just newspaper underneath, it will catch a lot of the dust from the chalk pastels, and a little bit easier for your cleanup. But that's really up to you. I work on a mat, and so I just wipe down my mat every day, and that's pretty easy too. Okay, so let's get started. I have my my 9 squares, and we're going to start with blending. And really with chalk pastels, blending happens very easily just using the chalk. You don't necessarily have to blend using your finger. So we're going to start just by practicing some blending using our chalk. So I'm just going to suggest that you get a lighter color and a darker color, whatever combination of those you like. I'm going to go with blue and green because I just love the way those go. So this is kind of a turquoise and this is a lighter green. And you're just going to do a little bit of the darker color in the middle of your page. And notice that I'm just using this rough edge. This is a brand new set of pastels for me. I'm just using this hard edge to lay down the color, okay? We will talk about how to use the whole flat edge of your pastel in a little bit, but for right now, you're just using that hard corner edge.
So we had a question that came up. We're using chalk. So are chalk pastels really chalk?
So chalk pastels are sort of a blend of chalk and pigment. The pigment is what's the strongest piece of it, and it's kind of held together by chalk pastels. But it is not it's not the same as a piece of chalk like sidewalk chalk. Certainly you could use that, but you will not see the intensity of the pigment with like regular chalkboard chalk or sidewalk chalk. They're called chalk pastels because they kind of fall apart and dust a little bit. And you'll see the difference when we switch to the oil pastels, what that really looks like, because they don't create the same kind of dust. But really they're called soft pastels, and they are much softer. They're crumbly. Okay, so good question. All right, so now I've got a little bit of green and a little bit of blue there. And I'm just gonna start to bring my green down into my blue, but I'm going to, and here's the kind of the trick with pastels. It's all about the pressure. If you were in my watercolor class, we talked about watercolor being all about the ratio of color to water. With pastels, it's all about the pressure that you're using with your hand. So the harder you press, the stronger the pigment color, and the lighter you press, the lighter the pigment. So I get a natural blending. I'm going to use a yellow as well so you can see this even better against the black. I'm just going to do a little bit of yellow off to the side here because you can see it even better. I can bring my yellow right into my blue, and I get this really nice soft edge of green in between the two. Okay, so some of this is thinking a little bit about the color wheel. Let me see if I can get my color wheel down. Oops, that was my phone. I'm going to grab my color wheel. I should have gotten that before. So when you're choosing colors, if you're blending, you want to think about colors that are next to one another on the color wheel. Okay, and so in other words, I might not choose like yellow and purple because I'm probably going to get something kind of muddy if I blend that, okay? Certainly that's part of an experiment, so go for it and try it. But if you remember your primary and secondary colors, your primary colors are yellow, red, and blue. And so in between yellow and red are orange, in between yellow and blue is green, and in between red and blue is purple. So anytime you use those primary colors, you're going to get the secondary colors in between when you blend. So you can kind of see that here as I go from my yellow into my blue. And if you want, you can try a little bit of blending there with your finger. I want to show you what you can do to blend with a paper towel. So I'm going to use my paper towel. I'm just going to fold it into like a handkerchief style and do that one more time so I get kind of a pizza pie. And then I'm going to roll up my edges. So notice what I'm trying to do is create that fine point on the end of my paper towel. And then I have a blending tool right there that I can use, okay? So notice the stronger you press, you will take up more color when you're blending. So the more firm your pressure, you will spread that pigment out and more of it will end up on your paper towel. So now here's what I do to just help get rid of some of the dust. I just lift it up, tap it on my piece underneath, And now I'm ready to go on to the next piece of my painting. Really, it's very interesting to me that they call working with pastels painting with pastels, because we're really just using our fingers. There's one method we're going to use a brush for at the end here, but otherwise we call it painting. So I also have my wet wipes in between because I'm a little bit of a neat freak that way. Okay, let's move on to broken color. Broken color also can be called pointillism. And if you're familiar with various art techniques, pointillism is that very, very fine point that's sometimes used in impressionistic painting. So this and a couple of other methods are going to look a little bit like a pointillist or impressionistic painting. So this time I'm going to choose some red and some yellow and some orange. I'm going to use these three. And if you want, you can follow right along with me, just you don't have to think too hard about it. Again, I'm choosing colors that are close to one another on the color wheel. And really all I'm doing is I'm making little dots on the paper. The closer I make my dots, the more dense that form will look. The further away I make my dots, the more you will be able to see when I add other colors in. So I've laid my red down, and now if I take my orange in, I'm going to go right over that dense part. Again, I'm using just this corner of my pastel. So it's going to be very dense on the left-hand side, and then I'm trying to sort of dissipate and spread out my dots as I move to the right. And you can see that you can distinguish the colors a little bit more over here. So sometimes you'll see this as a background, like maybe for a sky or something like that, where you might have clouds or areas of the sky that are a little more dense versus a little more open. And now I'm going to use the yellow. And once I really start layering this, you could get a nice sunset kind of effect. Really using this would be cool for sunsets, even water or grass, because it leaves us with the idea of texture. And that's one of the main themes with pastels in general, is that they really provide a lot of texture as we're working with them. Okay, any questions about broken color or pointillism so far? What you'll notice with that is that there's very little dust left behind. So I don't really need to, I can, but I got very little compared to what I got from my blending. Just use my wipe. I do like to do that because as I pick up other colors, I want to make sure I'm getting the color that I intend to lay down. Okay, hatching. Hatching is literally what it sounds like, hatching and cross hatching. So I'm going to go with another bright color here so that you can see. I'm going to choose some green this time. Green and orange are my favorite colors, so you'll see me choose those a lot. Hatching, I'm going to do the top half of this square in hatching and the bottom half in cross hatching. Okay, so hatching is diagonal marks, but they can go any way, actually, horizontal, diagonal in the other direction. So again, you can see that you can kind of use this as a way to texturize, show any kind of grass or fur. Works nicely for that. Okay, so that's hatching. And if I want to cross hatch, I'm making my diagonal lines in one direction. I'm going to switch colors just so you can see. And then I'm going to make diagonal lines in the other. Okay. And that might be used to create a little more density. Now, so you can see that so far, pastels are not all about blending, right? But what happens if I brush up against this as I'm working on it? It's going to blend, right? If I were to just wipe my finger across it, all of a sudden I'm blending. So again, if this is something that you really want to continue working with and learning about, you may want to invest in one of these fixatives. This is a final fixative, but again, there's another material called a workable fixative. And so I could spray down, it would hold the color that I've already laid down, and then I could still keep working on top of it. I'm not going to do that in the interest of time today, but just so you're aware of that. Okay, so the next one is feathering, and feathering is actually a little bit like hatching, because we are going to use diagonal strokes, but we're going to put them a little closer together so that we get an even more textured, almost like hair or grass. And I'm going to lay down a little bit of one color here to kind of maybe look like a wheat field. I'm going to grab some green and maybe make a tree. So I'm really using the edge, the corner edge of my pastel to create forms. It's not drawing. We don't really call this drawing. This is feathering. And then maybe I want to add a little background of some kind. So I'm just going to, and I could blend some of this if I want, but I'm going for the textured feathered look. So I'm layering, I'm laying one color down over the top so that I get, you know, various colors in there. But I'm really just using this sort of sideways stroke to give the impression of maybe a scene, a landscape off in the distance. I got a little bit of dust there, so I'm gonna tip this way.
So Julie, this is a good time for another question that came up.
Yeah.
Does using pastel paper create less dust?
Yes, it should in general create less dust, because when you sand the paper, you're roughing it up, and so the paper will actually catch more of the pigment, more of the color. So you tend to get a little bit less of the dusting when you use pastel paper. So I encourage you to try it out, or try sanding your paper a little bit. Just get one of these little sanding tools and use your mixed media or your watercolor paper to sand it. If you sand your paper, you're going to want a pretty heavyweight paper. So that's got to be mixed media or watercolor, anything that's got kind of more than 180-pound weight to it. I don't play a lot with pastel paper, like I said, because I really like mixed media. So I don't use it very often. Certainly worth the experiment. Okay. So moving on to the side stroke, not the swimming side stroke, but the side stroke. Here is where, if you have the kit that you got from the library, here's where I'm going to suggest that you maybe take a couple colors and break them. Only because we're working in very small squares. I didn't break mine in half. Notice that I broke mine in kind of like a third. So I took a third, and I think I have all these broken. You know, here, I'll show you what it looks like when I break one. So I put most of my hand over the chalk, over the pastel, and I just break off the end, okay? You'll get a little bit of dust when you do that, but it is kind of nice to have smaller pieces and then one large piece. So you'll see this kit has smaller pieces, so I like this one was my new one that I got for myself today because I had fun at Michael's. I'm going to use pink on this. And the side stroke is using the flat side of the pastel. Now, if you haven't opened and used your pastels yet, you're going to find that it's a little bit difficult to get the flat side down. So even for me, I'm really only getting the edges because I haven't worn down enough of my pastel yet. So you can use the corner, but the point is you're going to use the long edge or the long flat side. Okay, so the side stroke makes very wide and semi-transparent strokes. Okay, so we're going to do that with one color, just again using that side stroke. You're going to get a lot of dust with this, just like you do with blending. The other thing you can use to catch the dust in between is press that wax paper. I forgot to grab my wax paper from upstairs. But you can press that wax paper down and it will pick up some of that dust. This isn't wax paper. It's the inside lining of my pastel kit. But okay, so now we're going to do the same thing, but just layering. And layering is a little bit like blending. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and use some red in here. Let's see if we can see how the layering works. So I'm using that long edge, and I'm just, when I choose a darker color, I'm just changing really, if I stay in the same hue, if I stay in the same color, but I choose a darker version of it. For instance, if I do a light yellow and a dark yellow, I'm just changing what we call the value. So value is lightness to darkness, okay? So sometimes layering is nice to show just kind of a gradual change from lightness to darkness to change in value, okay? So that's pretty simple. You can play around with blending that if you want, gently or a little more firmly with your finger.
Kind of reminds me of this morning's sunrise.
Yes, well, wait till I show you the picture. That I hope we have time to do this because I'm looking at the clock here and I'm like, ah. But if not, I'll walk you through how to try the sunset picture, or sunrise picture on your own. Okay, scrumbling. Scrumbling is just fun to say, but it's also fun to do. Scrumbling is like making little tiny letter C's. Okay, so it's almost like making little C's or little circles, little curls. And I'm using the pointed corner of my pastel, and I'm creating a little bit of texture. And like my broken color pointillism, if I start spacing them out a little bit, I get a lighter effect as opposed to a dense effect. It's another way of creating some texture. Maybe you would use this for making clouds, maybe soft edges of flowers. And again, we can blend a little bit with this. So I'm just going to get another color. I'm going to go a little more dense on the left here with this. And then open it up a little bit. Yeah, the sunrises and sunsets have been fantastic. So that would be a really fun subject to try out your pastels with, because very easy for blending. I'll show you at the end of our session today what that might look like. So that is scrumbling. Kind of looks scrumbly, doesn't it? I think it's a really good word. All right, let's try some twisting and rolling. All right, if you happen to ever come across round soft pastels, you can do a roll, but you can't really do a roll unless you've really worn down the edges of your square pastels. So I'm really only going to show you a twist, but a roll is kind of what it sounds. You would literally roll it across the paper with your finger, and you would get kind of various random marks from it. But with twisting, we're going to use, again, the long, sharp edge, kind of like we did with the side stroke. But we're going to twist our hand, and what you'll find is you're going to want to have a lot more paper for this. But again, this is in our little square. We're going to try it. So I'm going to, on that edge, I'm just going to twist and turn. And what you'll see is you get kind of a snaky effect where in some places it looks like a side stroke, and in other places it looks like the sharp edge, you know, the long edge of the pastel. Okay, and I might try that in another color. Maybe I'll try orange. So it's really just twisting your hand, twisting the pastel, and you get some really cool, almost like northern lights, if you were going to do kind of a northern lights maybe style landscape. This might be a cool technique to use to get that sort of wavy feeling, that kind of gesture. Okay. We good on questions so far, Jen?
Don't be shy, though. If you have any, feel free to put them in there.
Okay.
We like questions.
All right, let's go to some drawing. Drawing is kind of what it sounds like. So we're going to use the sharp end of our corners here. We're going to create, I'm just going to do some simple flowers, maybe some grass. So drawing is exactly what it sounds like. You're just using the sharp edge to draw. Maybe I do some feathering or some hatching for flowers. Again, you start to think about how you might use these different techniques to create different types of gestures and looks. So maybe I want to scrumble for this flower because I want something that looks a little more open. What's that big, the globe flower? What is that globe thing? I love that flower. You see them in July. So I'm trying some different techniques here for my flowers, but really I just took the sharp edge of the corner of that green and created some stems. Let's see, maybe I'll make a couple of orange things here.
Julie, did you use 2 different blues on that one flower, or is that the same blue with just different pressure?
I used, I believe I used this blue. So I have a few more blues in my set than you guys do in yours, but you're pretty similar because you guys have a light blue, a dark blue, kind of a periwinkle, a dark blue, and a purple. But you can always use your white pastel to shade and give a little bit of value to these. So I believe I used the purple. I think I used this one. I think I used these two for that big globe. And by the way, if you're interested in, this one is just a Faber-Castell set. Faber-Castell soft pastels. It wasn't too expensive. It was around $20. And I like the size of them. Frankly, they're a little easier to hold than the set that I gave you guys. The set I gave you guys is a student set. They're the kind we use in our studio for just kind of beginning classes, but you know, it's fun to kind of try. The pastels are not terribly expensive. And I just like the size. My fingers are a little smaller, so I like the size of these Faber-Castells.
So we had a question about the edges. As you wear the pastels down, how do you keep the sharp edge?
Good question. So you can always use a utility or a tool knife to sort of flatten out the edges of your pastels. But what you'll find is that I don't think you'll find that over time. See, the cool thing is, even if you wear down like a corner like this, you're still going to have a sharp point right here. So you can't sharpen pastels. So over time, you will sort of get flatter edges, but you turn it around, you find another corner. You can always use a utility knife and sort of flatten out an edge to get a little bit of a point again. But when you do that, you know, you're dusting a little bit. But here's what's cool. If you wanted to do that, you can actually use a cheese grater or a lemon zester to create dust. Now, I don't have one of these down here, but what I am going to do is use a palette knife. And I'll just show you on my paper underneath. Actually, I have quite a bit of dust, but the next activity we're going to do is you're going to use your water and your brush. So you'll see that as I just use, this is just like a palette painting knife. And as I use that, I can dust off a little bit. And now I've actually created a really nice flat, sharp edge again for myself. See that? Where I had kind of a soft edge, I just created some more sharp edges by doing that. And you could double duty that by creating a watercolor with that. So we're going to do this last square here, but since I already have some dust on this paper, I'll show you what that looks like when you use that as watercolor. Okay, so the cool thing is that it's almost like the same pigment that's in a watercolor. And if you wet your brush just with plain water, dry it maybe a tad bit, you can pull up some of this color. Now on black paper, it's a little bit harder to see your watercolor effect. So that's why, you know, on white paper, you're going to see this a lot better than what you're seeing here. Okay, I want to show you another too, because this doesn't look that fabulous on black paper, but on your white paper, it's going to look pretty darn cool. I'll show you on here what that might look like, so that if I were to lay down, let's say some pink and a little bit of, I want a complementary color, so I'm going to put some purple next to it. I would use that water. Again, just dab a little bit of water on your brush, maybe dry it a tiny bit. And now you can just blend these colors together. I have too much water on my brush, so I'm going to take some of that off. And I'm really just moving the color around in that box. Another way to use watercolor, use pastel for watercolor. This was kind of my experimental page I did earlier today. So I had dusting in there, but I didn't really want to do a whole square of it. But I'll show you another way we can do this. We can take our wet brush. We can brush right off of the chalk soft pastel and go right onto the paper with it. And you'll notice that that produces much more like a watercolor look than this does, because you've got the density of color already on the paper, and then you're really just adding water. So if you were in my watercolor class, you might remember we did wet on dry. So this is kind of like wet on dry. And this method is really a much more 50-50, what I would call a 50-50 blend of water and color. Okay, so it's kind of fun to use your pastels in another way, like that. Okay. Any questions so far about soft pastels? I'm just going to turn my camera, my document camera off for a moment. If you want to turn your cameras on, you're welcome to share or ask any questions right now while we sort of transition into, again, these are just kind of short little exercises I was giving you to try out your soft pastels. So we're going to try some similar things with oil in a moment.
So anyone that wishes to, you should now be able to both unmute yourself and show your video if you'd like to.
And I also just want to show you the paper. This is the paper that you received in your kit. It's mixed media. It's the cheapest paper you can get at Michael's, and it's fine for this purpose. You can also get Strathmore or Canson mixed media paper, which is probably a little better quality. That's what I was using for my black. So that's really nice. And maybe unpin Jen for a second so I can see everybody if they want to share. Or any observations or things you want to, questions you want to ask. I'm going to put us in gallery view. Ooh, fun. Nice, Margaret. A little hard to see, Sharon. Can you pull it up a little bit closer to the camera? Nice. Oh, nice, Sarah. Good blending. Oh, yeah, you have a background. So, oh, I see you made some shapes, Sharon. Nice. How do people feel about that? Did you like working with pastels, or was that kind of icky for the fingers? We didn't do a whole lot of blending with that. Oh, Priscilla. Cool. I see you have a nice little garden in there at the bottom. Great. Awesome. So I'm going to show you now, we're going to switch to our oil pastels. And I have a new grid for you to make. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here for just a moment. Am I missing any questions, Jen?
No questions, but oh, hold on one sec, chat went away. Sarah said, I like the watercolor effect because it took care of the dust.
Right? I know. So I think again that's why I do a lot of mixed media with my pastel, because I don't really love the dust. I'm going to be honest with you. Soft pastels are not my favorite. I do have a little issue with the dust. And that's why I've kind of worked with different ways and tried different techniques to kind of manage that. But I do love the look that pastels, soft pastels give, especially on the dark paper. And I think they're really fun for certain kinds of looks. Oil pastels, oops, I gotta do this differently. Hold on, that's not the one we want. Oil pastels are much more like a crayon, okay, but they're made of oil. So what we're gonna do now is another grid. So you're gonna get out your second piece of paper. And I did a much more loose drawing this time with our oil pastel techniques. We're going to have 10 here today. So we're going to make 4 long rectangles.
And Julie, we do have another question, which is it best to draw a picture first and then fill it in with pastels, or to sketch first with the pastel?
I would sketch first with a pencil, and then I would work in, are you talking about, is the question about soft pastels or oil?
Not sure. Margaret, were you referring to oils or, oh, soft? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So play around with it a little bit. I mean, everybody kind of likes to work differently. The problem with drawing in pencil is that you do get a little bit of movement of the graphite around the page. So you can either sketch really, really lightly, or you can fill in basic shapes. And I want to show you a little bit. I don't know if we'll have time to walk through the whole example. I don't think we will, but I'm going to show you an example of a picture that I did. It's the exact same landscape, one done in soft pastel and one done in oil. And I'll at least talk you through how I outlined various forms and shapes to start with, and then I filled in. So I did not use a pencil in the portrait, in the landscape that I'm going to show you, but I did outline the forms with the hard edge of the soft pastel, and then I filled in things around. So I'll walk you through that in a minute as well. Okay, so for our oil pastels, you're going to have the 4 long rectangles, and we're going to do blending on the left-hand side, okay? So we're going to start with color and white, and then we're going to go to color and gray, and then we'll do color and black, and then finally we'll do color plus black plus white at the bottom. And then we're going to play a little bit. Remember, I said it's sort of about pressure. So we're going to play a little bit with the strength of pressure. It makes a little more difference with oil pastels than it does with soft pastels. So you will see that the harder you press with a soft pastel, you're just going to get more dust. And if you blend, you're going to lose that anyway. So with the soft pastels, it's a little bit less about the pressure than it is with the oil pastels. Scrumbling, I'm just making my own chart here really quick. This is a fun word, Graffito. I also just kind of love the words that we use. They're so fun. Pressure blend. Okay. So you should have your boxes made. And I'm going to stop sharing that and then just pop back over to my document camera. So now I've got my pastels, oil pastels next to me, and my my chart here for oil pastels. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do some blending with a color and white. So you want to choose a color that's going to stand out quite a bit. So we want contrast here. So either, and I would stay away from black for now, but either dark blue or red, something that's vibrant. So I'm going to go ahead with red. And I'm going to put quite a bit of pressure starting on the right-hand side of the box. And I'm going to keep pressing fairly hard. As I approach the middle of the box, I'm going to start letting up the pressure, and you'll see that my marks will get lighter and lighter as I go. So here we're just kind of playing with the pressure that we're applying. Okay, and then I'm going to get out my white, okay? And again, this is sort of just a natural way to blend without having to use your fingers. Oil pastels blend very well on their own. So now I'm going to start over on the left-hand side of the box, and I'm going to apply a good amount of pressure over there. You're not going to see much yet, but you'll start to see as I move in to my red, and then I'm going to let the pressure up as I come to the other side of the box. So, of course, I got pink in the middle. Now, let's say I want to bring some of that red over a little bit more in my blending. I might go back to just making a few more marks there and blending that in a little bit more. Or I can use my finger. I want to go up and down in the same direction. I don't want to switch it up. Okay, so when you're blending, whether you're blending with your finger or the chamois or the cloth, you want to make sure that you're going up and down. Now the chamois will take more of the color up. So I tend to kind of work, I use the chamois more for the soft pastels. I really like using my finger for the oil pastels. I really don't mind that at all. And I love the soft look you get when you blend. Okay, now you're going to have the conundrum of I've got red on my white. No big deal. Take your paper towel. It just comes right off.
Julie, would a Q-tip work for blending?
You can try a Q-tip. The problem is you are going to absorb and pull up a little bit more of the color, but certainly play around with it. See what works for you. There's lots of different methods. Again, there's the gummy eraser. That can work really nicely for blending. A lot of people like that. I like the gum eraser better than I like the chamois. The chamois just pulls the color right off the page, and I don't really like that. There's very little color on my gum eraser. It actually moves the color around the page as opposed to picking it up off of the paper. So we're going to do the same thing now with our color. I'm going to stick with the same color, okay, just so you can see the effect here. Gray and my color. So again, I'm going to apply a lot of pressure on the right-hand side of my box and gently start to ease up on the pressure as I move towards the middle, kind of fade that off. And I'm going to come in with gray on the other side. Now, I threw this word at you earlier about value, and this is kind of what happens when you add gray. You're changing the value of your red, okay? So you want to darken your red a little bit. You probably don't want to use black, but maybe you just want a slightly darker red. So you're going to add a little bit of gray in there. Again, use my finger to kind of blend in the middle. I'm going up and down, up and down. So you can see I've got a really nice dark red in the middle there, like a blood red almost. A little bit of my red off my gray. I see it's 7 o'clock already. I know that there are a few of you hardcore folks out here who like back-to-back Zooms. I really hope you can stay on, but I'm glad Jen is recording, because if you have to pop off at any time, Jen will send out the recording. You can watch the end here if for some reason you have to leave early, okay? All right, let's keep moving. We're gonna do the same thing with our red over here. Nice and strong. You can start playing around with other colors. I'm just using the same color so that you can see, but you could try this with something else if you want. And again, going lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And now I'm going to add my black. And I'm easing up on the pressure as I come in here to the middle. And black definitely requires a little more of our blending. So blend a little bit. See, I always end up going back to my finger. I think, you know, people will discover what kind of tool works best for you in terms of blending. And if you want, switch your finger halfway so that you don't bring too much of the black with you. I've noticed that when I work with black, I usually, or darker colors, I usually end up having to switch the finger that I'm using partway. And I'm definitely going to wipe my fingers off because I'm going to go back to doing color black and white. Okay, so this one's kind of interesting. We're going to do black on the end this time. So pretty saturated, but then coming off really easy with the pressure, much sooner than we did with the others. And now I'm going to go with my red in the middle. And I would say kind of a medium pressure I'm using on this, maybe not as strong as the others. And then my white. Now, one thing I didn't show you that I kind of like is a technique that I've used before is rather than just going up and down with the white, I do kind of little circles, almost like little swirls. And that tends to blend really nicely. So maybe try the swirl this time and see what you get. You can also turn your pastel around. So this edge is kind of crummy. Now I'm going to turn it over to the other side so that I can get my blending in a little bit more. So it's really interesting the blending you can do just with the pastel itself without using your finger. But then again, I'm going to go in and just wipe it off with my towel. Get that black off of there. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that are just not possible with crayons, you know, so it's really fun to explore a little bit with this. A little bit of pastel in the middle of my Graffito. Okay. All right, I don't mean to rush, but I do want to get through. I think what I'm going to show you is, I want to skip forward a little bit. I want to skip around because I'm just trying to be conscious of time. But I want to show you, this was the example that I was working on earlier today. We already played a little bit with heavy pressure and light pressure. So on your own, maybe later, you can just try this out. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to apply more pressure here when you're blending and much lighter here. Okay, so again, this is just about getting some density versus, you know, opaqueness versus transparent. Okay, you're really never going to be able to add water to this, so it's not like chalk where you can really brush it away and make it lighter and lighter and lighter. So you want to work with pressure on this. Okay, stippling and scrumbling are very similar to the pointillism and the scrumbling that we did with our soft pastels. Okay, so let's just do those real quick because that is one that's kind of fun. So the stippling is making our dots, our little pointillist dots. And again, we can bring a little more density on one side of the page and then kind of open it up. Blend a little color in here, maybe some yellow. And you'll see you'll get some blending with that. And again, kind of just playing with your density here. Okay, so I've got a little more dense on the left side. And here I would not use any blending at all, okay? This is really to get the effect of a pointillist kind of, or a impressionist kind of picture painting. All right, and remember our scrumbling is just taking those little tiny curly gestures and create a lot of texture for like the edges of flowers, trees, clouds. So just little round or semi-round movements there. I'm going to add some blue in on this one. And just overlap a little there, just layer a little tiny bit. And that's our scrumbling. This one's really fun, this Graffito. So I'm going to go back to using a pretty dark color, pretty saturated color, and I'm just going to blend a few things together. So I'm going to apply a lot of pressure for this one, okay? A lot of pressure, maybe some red, maybe some orange. I'm layering the color right one on top of the other. I'm just filling that square in, but I've got a lot of density there. Now we're going to take our scratch tools, okay? I have one of those. This is a little bit like scratch art. If you had kids that like scratch art, or maybe you like scratch art. I'm using a toothpick, and then I also have, that's what's kind of, this is actually kind of a clay tool that I use for clay, but it's got a nice point on it. And I can draw, I'm going to do this with you, you'll see it a little bit better. I can draw right into my pastel. So I'm really, it's almost like etching. So it's pretty neat because you get a textured look with it, and you can draw anything you want in here, okay? So I'm just kind of playing with creating a border. Okay, so a little bit tricky to see, but I'll hold it up closer. So that's Graffito. The more you layer, the more you'll see some of the colors underneath. If you use one solid color, you'll see more of the white paper underneath. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You can see a little bit of orange underneath here. It almost looks pink in my camera, but that's because I layered colors. So if you use one solid color, you'll see more of the white paper come through. And finally, the pressure blend, very similar to the heavy pressure versus light pressure up here. So I think I'm going to just go quickly through that. But let's say we want to do 3 different colors. I'm applying a lot of pressure. I'm coming right up against the next color, and I'm really using the pastel to do the actual blending. I'm not using my finger. I'm just pressing heavily with it. We'll go into blue from here. And if I wanted to, maybe I would go back with a fine tool here to just do a little bit of blending. Or use my finger. Okay. Kind of like the heavy pressure right here. Okay. But just maybe using more colors. So you have very saturated versus a lighter look. This would be really pretty right for sunsets and stuff. So I'm going to show you that in a second. Sorry that we rushed through that a little bit. This is the first time I've combined these two into one presentation like this, so I wasn't sure if we would make it through both. Now I know. I have to make it maybe a little bit shorter. Okay, so you may have questions. You might still be working, and that's fine. What I would like to do is show you an example of what happens when we do the same picture with oil versus chalk pastel. Okay. So the picture on the left is the soft pastel, and the picture on the right is the oil pastel. same subject, same colors, but you see that there's a much softer, hence soft pastels. There's a much softer look to a soft pastel versus an oil pastel. So I will show you, I'm going to take the picture down that I made. I made this one a couple days ago, and I will show you what I did because the question earlier was about outlining. So I'll show you kind of how I walked through this I'll just walk you through it with the outlining. While I'm doing that, do we have any questions so far about oil pastels? I'm sorry if I'm rushing.
We don't have questions just yet, but Sharon says, great intro to pastels. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, let me show you. I'll just walk you through because there was a question about, when you're ready to create a picture of some kind. So I'm going to just take my pastels and I'm going to basically go right over the top of this. What I would do is encourage you to try this at home on your own. If you're curious about how I did the border, it does make it a lot easier if you get not painter's tape like the kind you're going to use in your house, like the blue tape, but this is called artist tape, and it looks like masking tape, but it's even less sticky than your painter's tape. And you can create really nice borders, and it'll help you to kind of confine your work and not get dust all to the edges if you tape it down. So I taped everything down, and also as you're rubbing, then you don't move your page around, okay? So it's kind of nice for that as well. So I'll just show you how I kind of outlined this. The first thing that I did in this picture was I created the mountain forms, okay? So I outlined the mountain forms on that side, and then I outlined my mountain form on this side, okay? And I didn't blend anything. I just started with that. The next step is I went up into the corner here with my red. I don't want to go over the top of this entirely, but I went up in the corner with my red. Let's see where my other red is. I used my other set for this. And I started the blending technique that we learned here in the soft pastels. So I laid the color down, okay? I laid some red down. I laid some orange down. I laid some yellow down. And then before I got all the way down to the mountain form, I made a circle. I outlined a circle as we did when we learned drawing. So I used the hard edge of the pastel when I did that. And I just left that. I didn't blend or anything. The only thing I did was do a little bit of blending in here. Okay. Okay. Now this is the same. It's a little bit different for the pastel, but for the most part, the same from one side to the other. Then what I did is I went to the mountains. Okay. So I got the top. I worked my top down. Okay. So I started here and I moved my way down. Okay. So then I went in with my blues, my various blues. Again, I did some blending through here with different colors. Used my tools or my finger to kind of blend that edge in there. Or you can leave it if you want a little bit more of a hard edge, depending on the look. I used some white in here because I really only had, in this other set, I really only had the one blue and the periwinkle. So I used my white to create a little more light at the top of that mountain range. And then I moved to the bottom, and I started with the red down in the bottom corner, laid in red, orange, yellow, and then I finished with a tiny bit of blue. And all of this was blending. And what I would encourage you is on your first picture, just try one of those techniques. So just say, I'm going to make a picture where I'm just using blending so I can really get the hang of blending, okay? And pretty much the same thing for the pastel over here. Started in the top with the red, went down with the orange. The one thing I just want you to know is when you're blending with pastels, you can go any direction and it won't matter. You will not see necessarily a whole lot of direction when you're blending with soft pastels. You will see direction with the oil pastel. So for instance, if I went side to side and then I switched and went up and down, I'm not going to get the same look. So notice that all of my strokes are up and down. Okay. Whereas some these over here, sometimes I went sideways. Sometimes I tried a little bit of the side stroke. I changed it up a little bit. So we don't have the same type of strokes when we work with oil pastel that we do with soft pastels. So there's advantages, you know, to both. And then again, I did the mountain range and then filled in with red, orange, yellow, and blue last. Okay, my darkest color last there. Okay.
Julie, would you use the same kind of fixative to set the oil pastels, or would you use something different?
You can. Oil pastel doesn't need it quite as much as the chalk pastel, but you certainly can. I tend to, with my oil pastels, when I store them, I just put wax paper in between. It will pull up a tiny bit of the oil, but yeah, you can use the same kind of fixative. This can really be used on anything, any kind of pastel, charcoal, or pencil. So, you know, it's a kind of an all-purpose. So yeah, you can certainly, or like I said, hairspray if you don't want to buy pastel. So this was to be our last exercise, but I packed a lot in there for everybody. So I will open it up for any questions, comments, maybe things you noticed as you were working that you want to share with the group. Any last bits? I do love to see people's faces if you want to turn your camera on before we say goodbye, but you don't have to. Tends to make me.
I just want to say that, like, that last example that you gave was just astounding to me, the difference of the feel that you get using a chalk pastel versus the vibrancy of the oil pastel. Yeah.
Right. And so let me just do the speaker again. Okay. So yeah, I mean, let me just again point out that when you work on white paper with soft pastel, it's going to fade into the background a lot more too. I mean, you notice the difference in the vibrancy between using soft pastel on black versus soft pastel on white. Okay, so just something to kind of note, because you will get much more vibrancy when you use your soft pastels on black paper. It's just the background, right? And the oil pastel naturally stands out because it's a much more saturated color base. And then you've got the oil, which just adheres to the paper in a way that chalk soft pastels don't. So yeah, beautiful. It's really pretty stunning, right?
It is. Yeah, I want that to be a postcard right now.
Again, this was not a, this was the kind of activity that if you know these techniques that I taught you today, you can create a simple picture like this. You could sit out on Lake George and paint yourself a sunset.
Nice.
Just blending and doing maybe a few other techniques that I showed you today. So
wonderful. Well, I just we can end on this, I think. Sharon says the class was awesome. Oh, I'm sorry, Cindy said the class was awesome. Thank you so much. And Sharon said that loved all the information and lesson. Thank you. Sarah says this was so much fun. Thank you. And Sharon asked if we would be offering a watercolor class again, or is it online? And the good news is, Sharon, we actually recorded that one too. So it is on our library's YouTube channel. And I don't know if it's on the C.R.E.A.T.E channel too, but it's definitely on the library's YouTube channel.
I'm not sure if I put it up on our C.R.E.A.T.E channel, but I will, let me just put in the chat really quick. And it's on our website too, or on the literature that I gave you. If you go to our website, we also have 40 plus YouTube tutorials that are all different type of art materials. And if you go to our website, if you see Taking Care at Home, you'll see our YouTube channel, or just go to YouTube and type in C.R.E.A.T.E Community Studios. We have a channel, you can follow it, and we put up free tutorials all the time. I can't remember if we put up the watercolor one that I did with you, but yes, that is on the library page. So you can do that class.
And just to add a few more comments, Amy says, thank you so much. Very fun. And Joanne said, enjoyed this as much as your watercolor class. And Sharon's thanking us again. She said, that's great. So
Wonderful.
I think we all had a great time and learned something tonight, and really want to get out our papers and our colors and start playing.
Yay. Yeah, I hope it demystified it a little bit for everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm sorry if I was kind of on speed mode there. I wanted to make sure I got the most important things in, but again, Jen is recording this, so she'll send it out to everybody, and you can always go back and watch things if you missed it or want to see it again. That's my dog saying goodbye.
And good night. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll see you again soon.
Have fun being creative. See you again soon.
Bye.